The Vorthak Empire ruled 12 star systems like gods among mortals. Their black ships moved through space like death itself, carrying warriors who had never known defeat. For 300 years, they had crushed every species that dared resist. Their rule. On the distant world of Kepler 442b, 3,000 human colonists had built a simple life among the red rocks and purple skies. They grew crops in biodomes, raised children in prefab homes, and fixed machines that broke down every other day. It wasn't paradise, but it was theirs. The morning the ultimatum arrived, Kim Dae-ho was elbow-deep in the colony's main atmospheric processor, cursing at whoever had designed the filtration system. Sparks flew from his plasma welder as he tried to patch a cooling line that should have been replaced months ago. Dae-ho! His assistant Choi Min-soo came running across the maintenance bay. Emergency meeting in the council hall. Everyone has to come. Dae-ho wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of grease. Can't it wait? This piece of junk is going to blow if I don't fix the pressure valve. The governor says it's about aliens. That got Dae-ho's attention. He grabbed his tool belt and followed Min-soo through the narrow corridors of the colony's main building. The walls hummed with the sound of recycling systems and power generators, all held together by creative engineering and stubborn determination. The council hall was packed. Families crowded together on metal benches while their leaders stood at the front, faces grim. Governor Lee Hyun-woo held a data pad that glowed with alien symbols. "Citizens of New Seoul," the governor began, his voice shaking slightly, "we have received a message from something called the Vorthak Empire." The message played on the main screen. A creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a nightmare spoke in a voice like grinding metal. Its words were translated by the colony's computer, but the meaning was clear enough. Surrender in 7 solar cycles or face annihilation. The hall erupted in scared voices. Parents pulled their children closer. Old men who had survived Earth's resource wars shook their heads. Young adults who had never seen real violence looked confused and frightened. Colony Administrator Park So-min stood up. "Our options are limited. We could try to negotiate, send our best diplomats to—" "What diplomats?" interrupted Farmer Jung Taiwan. "We're mechanics and farmers, not politicians." "Then we fight," said Security Chief Han Byul, but her voice lacked conviction. Everyone knew their security force consisted of 12 people with stun weapons designed to break up bar fights. The arguing grew louder. Some wanted to run, others to hide, a few to send a message begging for mercy. In the back corner, Dae-ho continued working on a broken environmental sensor while listening with half an ear. "The Crimson Guard has never been defeated," someone read from their computer. "They destroyed the Kalari Rebellion in 6 hours. The Zephyrian resistance lasted 3 days." "Maybe we can hide in the caves," suggested teacher Kim Ji-won. "With 3,000 people and children." Park So-min shook her head. "They'll find us. What about Earth? Can they send help?" Governor Lee looked tired. "Earth is 47 light-years away. Even if they sent a fleet today, it would take decades to reach us." The voices grew more desperate. Fear filled the room like smoke. Some colonists were already talking about evacuation, even though their ships could barely reach the next system. That's when Dae-ho stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through the panic like a knife. "I'll go," he said. The room fell silent. 3,000 pairs of eyes turned to look at the man in grease-stained coveralls, his tool belt hanging crooked on his waist. Park So-min blinked. "Dae-ho, this isn't a job for—" "Look," Dae-ho interrupted, wiping his hands on an already dirty rag. "I've been fixing their broken systems for 3 days straight. The water recyclers are held together with spare parts and prayer. The atmospheric processors sound like dying animals. Half our power grid runs on backup systems that were supposed to be temporary 2 years ago." He gestured around the room. "You want to know what I think? These Vorthak idiots picked the wrong week to mess with me." Governor Lee stepped forward. "Dae-ho, you don't understand. This is war. These are trained killers. The Crimson Guard are described as unstoppable warriors who fly around in ships," Dae-ho finished. "Ships with engines and life support. And weapon systems, all of which can break down if you know what you're doing." The silence stretched. In the back, a child started crying and was quickly hushed. "They want a representative?" Daiho picked up his plasma welder and tested its charge. Fine, but I'm not changing clothes, and I'm bringing my tools. He walked toward the door, his boots echoing in the quiet hall. Just before leaving, he turned back. Oh, and Minsu, keep an eye on that atmospheric processor. If the pressure drops below 80%, hit the manual override. I'll be back to fix it properly. The door closed behind him, leaving 3,000 colonists staring at the spot where their unlikely champion had stood. The neutral moon of Epsilon 7 hung in space like a dead rock, its surface scarred by mining operations from a dozen different species. The old trading station, built into its largest crater, served as neutral ground for negotiations throughout this sector of the galaxy. Kim Daeho's transport ship wheezed as it approached the docking bay, its engines making sounds that would have worried anyone who understood machinery. He'd borrowed the old cargo hauler from the colony's supply runs, and it flew about as well as a brick with attitude problems. Docking clamps engaged, the station's automated system announced in 3 different languages. Daeho grabbed his tool bag and headed for the airlock, still wearing the same grease-stained coveralls he'd had on during the colony meeting 2 days ago. The station's main corridor was empty, except for maintenance drones that skittered along the walls like metal spiders. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that reminded Daeho of the engine room during a plasma leak. His boots echoed on the metal deck as he made his way to the designated meeting chamber. That's when he heard it, the deep thrumming of massive engines approaching the station. Through the observation windows, he watched as a Vorthak battlecruiser glided into view like a predator stalking prey. The ship was beautiful in the way that deadly things often are. Its hull gleamed like polished obsidian, covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. It moved with the fluid grace of something designed by beings who understood the art of war. As it settled into the docking bay, opposite his own rickety transport, Daeho couldn't help but appreciate the engineering even as he spotted its flaws. Landing thrusters are all wrong, he muttered, watching the ship's final approach. Somebody's going to burn out those exhaust manifolds real quick with that configuration. The meeting chamber was a simple room with a metal table and basic life support. Daeho found a cargo crate to sit on and pulled out his plasma wrench to examine while he waited. The tool had seen better days, its housing cracked and its power cell held in place with industrial tape, but it still worked perfectly. The chamber's main door hissed open with dramatic flair. Steam poured through the opening as massive footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond. When the mist cleared, Warlord Vextar of the Crimson Guard stepped into the light. The alien warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body encased in ceremonial armor that looked like it had been forged from starlight and nightmares. Glowing symbols pulsed along the armor's surface, and his helmet bore the snarling face of some ancient predator. Energy weapons hung from his belt like deadly jewelry, and his cloak moved as if it had a life of its own. Vextar had expected to find either cowering diplomats begging for mercy, or perhaps a worthy warrior ready to die with honor. Instead, he found a human in work clothes sitting on a box, completely absorbed in examining what appeared to be a maintenance tool. The warlord stood in the doorway for a full minute, waiting for some reaction. Fear, awe, recognition of his terrible presence, anything. The human just kept turning the wrench over in his hands like he was checking for wear patterns. Human. Vextar's voice boomed through his helmet's speakers, enhanced by systems designed to strike terror into enemy hearts. You stand before the might of the Vorthak Empire. Kneel and— Your landing thrusters are misaligned, Daeho interrupted without looking up. And whoever did your reactor shielding should be fired. That's a radiation leak waiting to happen. The Dia. Prepared speech died in Vextar's throat. In 300 years of conquest, no one had ever interrupted his intimidation ritual to discuss mechanical problems. What? The word came out more confused than menacing. Daeho finally looked up from his wrench, his expression that of someone explaining why the refrigerator wasn't working to a particularly slow child. I said your ship is a death trap. Look at those. Exhaust ports through the window there. Completely wrong angle for atmospheric entry. Your heat dissipation is probably terrible, and I bet your crew compartments get hot enough to cook food. He gestured with his wrench toward the docking bay. And don't get me started on your power coupling efficiency. I can hear the harmonic vibration from here. Vextar turned to look at his ship through the observation window. No one had ever critiqued his vessel's engineering before. Mostly they were too busy running or dying. "The ship functions perfectly," he said, though there was less certainty in his voice than before. "Functions and works properly are two different things." Daiho stood up, still holding his wrench. "I bet your maintenance crews spend half their time fixing things that shouldn't break. Your fuel consumption is probably through the roof, and your weapons probably overheat after extended use." The uncomfortable truth was that Vextar's ship did have all those problems. The engineering corps insisted they were acceptable trade-offs for the vessel's intimidating appearance and combat capability. "This is what passes for engineering in your empire?" Daiho shook his head. "No wonder you need 12 star systems to support your fleet. Half your resources probably go to fixing things that were built wrong the first time." Something snapped in Vextar's warrior mind. Perhaps it was the casual dismissal of technology that represented the pinnacle of Vorthak achievement. Perhaps it was the growing suspicion that this maintenance worker might actually be right about the design flaws. Or perhaps it was simply that no one had ever talked to him like he was an apprentice who'd forgotten to tighten the bolts. The warlord drew, his energy blade with a sound like tearing silk. The weapon hummed to life, its edge glowing white-hot with contained plasma. He raised it above his head and charged across the chamber with a battle cry that had frozen the blood of countless enemies. Daiho sighed and shifted his grip on the plasma wrench. 5 minutes later, Vextar lay unconscious on the deck. His ceremonial armor bore 17 distinct dents from what appeared to be precision strikes delivered with surgical accuracy. His energy blade lay deactivated nearby, its power cell somehow disconnected despite being a sealed unit. Daiho stood over the fallen warrior, examining his handiwork while muttering under his breath. "Amateurs who can't even properly balance. They're gyroscopes. Look at this armor design, all flash, no function. Weight distribution is completely off. Joints bind up during rapid movement, and the power systems are overcomplicated." He nudged the unconscious alien with his boot. Probably never did a day of real work in his life. He picked up the energy blade to examine its construction, immediately spotting 6 different ways to improve its efficiency. Outside the observation window, the Vorthak battlecruiser waited silently, its crew undoubtedly wondering why their commander hadn't emerged victorious after such a short encounter. Daiho activated the chamber's communication system. "Station. Control, this is the human representative. The Vorthak delegate seems to have suffered a mechanical failure. You might want to send a medical team." He sat back down on his cargo crate and resumed examining his plasma wrench, already thinking about the next warrior they'd probably send and wondering if their ships would have the same design problems. High Admiral Zulmiran stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, his forearms crossed in disgust as he reviewed the reports. 3 of his best warriors had fallen to a single human mechanic. The honor of the Crimson Guard lay in ruins, and whispers of weakness spread through the Empire like a plague. "Enough," he growled, his voice echoing through the massive command center. "If individual combat has failed, we end this with overwhelming force." The Eternal Conquest was the pride of the Vorthak fleet. 5 miles long and bristling with enough weapons to crack a planet's crust, it represented the absolute pinnacle of their military engineering. Its crew of 10,000 warriors had conquered entire star systems without breaking formation. When the dreadnought dropped out of hyperspace near Epsilon 7, its massive bulk blotted out the stars. The neutral station's automated systems immediately began broadcasting surrender requests in 12 different languages, assuming they were about to witness an execution. Kim Dae-ho sat in the station's observation lounge, surrounded by a growing collection of what he'd started calling educational materials. Weapons, armor pieces, and technology samples from his previous encounters covered 3 tables. He'd been busy taking everything apart to understand how it worked, and more importantly, how it could work better. Through the massive viewing window, he watched the Vorthak dreadnought position itself like a predator preparing to strike. The ship's hull gleamed with weapon ports, sensor arrays, and shield generators. It should have been impressive. Instead, Daiho felt his blood pressure rising. "Now that," he said, picking up his newly modified plasma wrench, "is the most inefficient use of materials I've ever seen. The wrench had evolved during his stay on the station. What started as a simple maintenance tool now incorporated salvaged Vorthak technology, properly integrated and calibrated. The power cell from a Crimson Guard energy blade provided clean energy, while components from their armor systems gave it capabilities no human tool had ever possessed. The station's communication system crackled to life. High Admiral Zul'Miran's image appeared on every screen, his reptilian features twisted in fury. "Human mechanic," his voice boomed. "You have humiliated my warriors and dishonored the Empire. I have come to personally ensure your destruction. Surrender now, and your death will be swift." Deho looked up from the disassembled weapon he'd been examining. "Your thermal management system is completely backwards," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "And that main gun configuration? You're losing at least 40% efficiency through harmonic interference." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "What?" "I said your ship is a floating engineering disaster." Deho stood up, gathering his tools. 5 miles of wasted space, overpowered weapons that probably burn out their own focusing arrays, and I bet your crew quarters are either freezing or boiling, depending on which deck they're on. Before Zul'Miran could respond, the human had cut the communication. Through the bridge's main view screen, they watched him leave the station in what appeared to be a maintenance pod, heading directly toward their dreadnought. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, "the human vessel is approaching. Should we destroy it?" "No," Zul'Miran said, his voice cold. "Let him come. When he sees the true might of our ship, he will understand his mistake." The maintenance pod docked with one of the Eternal Conquest's outer airlocks. Within minutes, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Then the lights started flickering. Engineering reports power fluctuations on Deck 7, called Outer Nervous Technician. Deck 12 is reporting atmospheric irregularities, added another. Zul'Miran activated the internal security cameras, expecting to see fierce battles as his crew engaged the intruder. Instead, he watched something far more disturbing. The human wasn't fighting his crew. He was fixing things. On Deck 7, Deho had opened an access panel and was rewiring the power distribution grid, while Security Chief Vorkesh and his team stood paralyzed in a corridor where the artificial gravity kept shifting between normal and 3 times normal every few seconds. "There's your problem," Deho muttered, adjusting a coupling that had been installed backwards. "No wonder your weapons keep overheating." On Deck 12, he'd somehow reversed the atmospheric recycling system, filling the corridors with a harmless but foul-smelling gas that sent the entire security team fleeing for breathing masks that were mysteriously locked in storage compartments. The Admiral watched in growing horror as the human worked his way through the ship like a virus in the computer system. Every system the mechanic touched began working exactly as it was designed to work, which unfortunately meant it no longer worked the way the crew expected. Fire suppression systems activated in corridors where startled warriors gathered, dousing them in flame-retardant foam. Blast doors sealed randomly, trapping security teams in sections of the ship where the lights had been dimmed to barely visible levels. The communication system began broadcasting maintenance alerts in a constant stream, making coordination impossible. "He's in engineering," shouted the tactical officer. The bridge crew watched their screens in disbelief as Deho entered the dreadnought's main engineering section. Instead of sabotaging the massive reactor that powered the ship, he began making adjustments. "Finally," he said, examining the reactor's control panel, "whoever set up this power curve should go back to engineering school." The Eternal Conquests, engines which had run hot and inefficient for decades, suddenly began operating at peak performance. The ship's power output increased by 30%, while fuel consumption dropped. Every system throughout the vessel started working better than it ever had, which was exactly the problem. Weapons arrays that had been designed to operate at reduced efficiency to prevent overheating suddenly began drawing their full rated power. Overloaded circuits that had been kept stable through careful energy management began failing as they received the power they were supposed to handle. Systems that had been jury-rigged to work around design flaws suddenly found themselves trying to operate as originally intended. "Sir," the engineering officer reported, his voice panicked, "the human has optimized our power systems. Everything is working perfectly." "Then what's the problem?" Zulmiran demanded. Our ship was never designed to work perfectly, sir. It was designed to look intimidating while functioning adequately. We're experiencing cascade failures throughout all departments. On the security cameras, they could see Daeho making his way toward the bridge, leaving a trail of perfectly functioning and completely unusable systems behind him. His modified plasma wrench cut through blast doors like they were made of paper, while his understanding of the ship's design let him avoid every security measure. The bridge doors hissed open, and Kim Dae-ho stepped inside, looking around at the gleaming command center with the expression of someone who'd just found a particularly complicated machine that needed fixing. "Nice setup," he said, walking toward the Admiral's command chair while casually adjusting settings on control panels as he passed. "But your command interfaces are needlessly complex. Your tactical displays are showing too much irrelevant data, and your environmental controls are fighting each other." High Admiral Zulmiran, Supreme Commander of the Crimson Guard and Terror of a dozen worlds, found himself backed against his own command chair by a human in coveralls who was critiquing his ship's user interface design. "What do you want?" the Admiral asked, his voice barely controlled. Daeho paused in his examination of the tactical display. "Want? I want your people to stop bothering my colony so I can get back to work. Do you have any idea how many systems are going to break down while I'm out here dealing with this nonsense?" He pulled out a datapad and began downloading the ship's technical specifications. "But since I'm here, I'm taking these schematics. Maybe I can fix some of these design problems for you." The Admiral's final log entry, recorded after the human, had left his ship in perfect working order and completely unusable, was brief and to the point. "The human doesn't fight. He troubleshoots. We are apparently the problem." Kim Dae-ho's transport ship limped back to Kepler 442b 3 weeks after he'd left, its cargo bay stuffed with salvaged alien technology and data storage devices containing enough technical specifications to keep an entire engineering department busy for years. The ship's engines wheezed and sparked as he brought it down to the colony's landing pad, drawing worried looks from the ground crew. "Dae-ho!" Colony Administrator Park So-min ran across the tarmac as he climbed out of the cockpit. "What happened? We lost contact with you after the 3rd day, and then we started getting these strange messages from the Vorthak Empire." Dae-ho stretched his back and grabbed his tool bag from the passenger seat. "Had to make a few house calls. Their ships were in worse shape than I thought." He gestured toward the cargo bay. "Brought back some homework. We need to talk." Governor Lee, Hyun-woo arrived with half the colony council in tow, all talking at once about diplomatic protocols and military threats. Dae-ho held up a hand to quiet them. "They're not bad people," he said, pulling out a thick stack of repair manuals written in his own cramped handwriting. "Just really, really bad at building things that work." The emergency meeting that followed lasted 6 hours. Dae-ho spread alien schematics across every available table in the community center, pointing out design flaws with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a new hobby. Power systems that fought against each other, weapons that overheated their own platforms, life support systems that required constant maintenance just to function. "Look at this," he said, tapping a blueprint of a Vorthak battlecruiser. "They've got 17 different types of power couplings in a single ship. 17, and none of them are compatible with each other. No wonder their maintenance crews spend more time fixing things than using them." Young engineer Choi Min-soo leaned over the schematics. "But how did they conquer 12 star systems with equipment this bad?" "Volume," Dae-ho replied. "They throw so many ships at a problem that some of them work long enough to win. It's like trying to fix a water leak by flooding the room." 3 days later, a message arrived that made the entire colony hold its breath. But instead of another ultimatum, it was a formal request from the Vorthak Empire asking for a technical consultation agreement. The meeting was scheduled for the colony's community center, which had been hastily cleaned and equipped with translation devices. When the Vorthak delegation arrived, the colonists were surprised to see familiar faces. Former warlord Vex Tar stepped off the transport ship, but gone were his ceremonial armor and energy weapons. Instead, he wore practical work clothes and carried what appeared to be a tablet for taking notes. Behind him came the other warriors Dae-ho had defeated, all similarly dressed and looking somewhat embarrassed. "Greetings, humans of New Sol Colony," Vextar said, his voice missing its previous menace. I was Warlord Vextar of the Crimson Guard. I am now the Empire's newly appointed Director of Engineering Standards. Deho looked up from the power cell he'd been repairing. "About time. Did you bring the maintenance records I asked for?" "Yes, sir." Vextar handed over several data storage devices. Complete technical documentation for all fleet assets, infrastructure reports from our 12 systems, and incident reports from the past 50 years. The word "sir" didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Governor Lee cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss terms?" "We have analyzed your methods," Vextar continued, glancing nervously at Deho. "Our infrastructure requires significant improvement. Our ships break down constantly. Our space stations require endless repairs, and our weapon systems have a failure rate that our enemies have begun to exploit." Deho nodded while examining one of the data files. "I've got a list. Also, we're going to need to talk about your safety protocols and your training standards, and basically everything else you've been doing wrong for the past 1,000 years." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of territorial demands or tribute payments, the discussions focused on power efficiency, ratings, maintenance schedules, and proper tool calibration. Former warriors took notes on metallurgy and asked detailed questions about preventive maintenance. "Your biggest problem," Deho explained while sketching on a whiteboard, "is that you design things to look impressive instead of designing them to work well. This weapon array looks scary, but it uses 3 times more power than it needs and generates so much heat that it can only fire for 2 minutes before shutting down." Former War Chief Morgax raised his hand like a student in class. "How do we fix that?" "Redesign the whole system. Better cooling, more efficient power distribution, and for the love of all that's mechanical, standardize your components." The agreement was signed 3 months later. The Vorthak Empire would provide resources and funding for what became known as the Kim Deho Interstellar Engineering Firm. In exchange, Deho and his growing team of human engineers would help rebuild their technology from the ground up. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, the first properly designed Vorthak ships rolled out of the shipyards. They were smaller than the old dreadnoughts, but they worked. More importantly, they kept working without constant repairs. Former Crimson Guard warriors became apprentice engineers, learning to solve problems with precision tools instead of brute force. Vextar turned out to have a natural talent for systems integration, while Morgax discovered a gift for power management that surprised everyone. The key colony of New Sol became the unlikely center of a galactic engineering revolution. Ships that had limped through space for decades were retrofitted with human-designed improvements. Space stations that had required constant emergency repairs began operating smoothly for the first time in centuries. "You know what the best part is?" Deho told his assistant Minsu while reviewing the latest batch of repair requests from across the Empire. "They're actually grateful. Turns out nobody likes working with equipment that breaks down every other day." The Vorthak Empire still controlled 12 star systems, but now they did it with technology that actually functioned as intended. Their ships arrived on time, their weapons worked when needed, and their crews spent more time exploring and building than fixing and cursing. In the depths of space, maintenance crews throughout the galaxy began to notice something remarkable. Equipment worked better, systems ran smoother, and the constant cycle of breakdown and emergency repair became a thing of the past. The best way to solve a problem, it turned out, was to fix it correctly the first time, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against an empire wasn't another weapon at all. It was just one very annoyed mechanic with a wrench and the knowledge of how things were supposed to work. The Yet.